You probably picture a Tyrannosaurus Rex when you think of a big, scary dinosaur.
Right.
Huge and iconic.
The classic, yeah.
But get this. There was another Tyrannosaurid, Albertosaurus, that was, well, significantly smaller.
Definitely smaller, yeah.
Yet the sheer number of its fossils we've dug up paints this incredibly detailed and honestly surprising picture of its life. Here's where it gets really interesting. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take fascinating sources and really extract the core knowledge you need to know.
Today, we're diving deep into the world of Albertosaurus sarcophagus. It's a Tyrannosaur dinosaur that was stalking the ancient landscapes of what's now Alberta, Canada, way back in the late Cretaceous period.
Right.
Our goal is to sort of synthesize everything we know, from its initial discovery right through to the wealth of information we've got from countless fossils.
So you can get a clear, engaging understanding of this pretty remarkable creature and its world. We've got the scientific papers, the naming details, those incredible discoveries, and all the ongoing research into how it actually lived. So let's start at the beginning. How did this Alberta lizard get its name and, come to light?
Okay, so the name Albertosaurus that was given by the prominent paleontologist Henry Fairfield Osborn back in 1905.
Osborn.
Yeah, and the meaning is quite direct. Alberta lizard,
Huh.
pretty straightforward, honoring the province where the first bits were found.
Makes sense.
And the species name, sarcophagus, that comes from ancient Greek. It means flesh-eating, which, let's face it, is pretty spot on for a large predator like this one.
Can't argue with that. And the very first discovery, that was way back in the 19th century, wasn't it?
That's right. The holotype specimen, it's the key reference, the main one, for the whole species. It's a partial skull.
Just part of one.
Yeah, a partial skull that Joseph Burterrell's Geological Survey of Canada expedition unearthed way back in 1884, along the Red Deer River in Alberta.
Wow, 1884.
It's amazing to think that even this incomplete skull, given the limitations back then, laid the foundation for our understanding. They found a smaller, less complete skull with some other bones nearby a few years later, too.
So these early finds, they weren't immediately flagged as something totally new. There was some confusion, maybe, with another known genus?
Precisely. Yeah, back in 1892, the paleontologist Edward Drinker Cope assigned these two skulls to an existing species called Laelaps incrasitus.
Laelaps.
Yeah, but the genus name Laelaps had actually already been used for a mite, believe it or not.
A mite. Oh, boy.
So it had to be replaced, and it was replaced with Dryptosaurus. But Cope, despite his famous rivalry with Othniel Charles Marsh, who proposed the new name, he famously refused to use it.
Stubborn.
A bit. Later on in the early 1900s, Lawrence Lamb used the name Dryptosaurus incrasitus in his detailed descriptions. So yeah, it was a bit of a tangled taxonomic web for a while there.
It sounds like sorting out dinosaur names can be quite the puzzle.
Yeah.
So how did Albertosaurus finally get its own official identity then?
Well, Osborn stepped in. He pointed out that D. incrassatus was based on some pretty generic Tyrannosaur teeth, not very distinctive,
Oh, okay.
which made linking the Canadian skulls to that species kind of uncertain. Plus, these Alberta skulls were quite different from the known remains of Dryptosaurus aquilunguis, which is the original defining species of Dryptosaur.
All right, so it's type species.
Exactly. So because of all this, Osborn established the new name, Albertosaurus sarcophagus, in 1905. He did give credit to Lamb's earlier detailed work, though.
And those original skull pieces, the holotype and the paratype, they're still crucial today, right, for understanding Albertosaur?
Oh, absolutely. These original specimens are housed safely in the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa. Now, interestingly, in the early 2000s, there was some discussion about whether the holotype, being a bit damaged, could definitively represent a unique species. But in 2010, Thomas Carr identified a specific and unique feature, basically an enlarged air-filled opening on a bone in the roof of the mouth, the palatine bone.
A specific air pocket.
Sort of, yeah. And this feature was present in the holotype, the paratype, and later discoveries. So that effectively confirmed Albertosaurus as a valid and distinct dinosaur.
Solid evidence, then.
Pretty solid. Oh, and it's also worth just briefly mentioning the name Deinodon sarcophagus. That was used for a short time for Albertosaurus right after its initial naming. Another bit of that taxonomic history.
Okay, so a bit of a winding path to its official name, but ultimately Albertosaurus stands on its own. Now, after these initial discoveries, there was one site in particular that really blew things open, didn't it? Gave us an incredible look into these animals. The famous Dry Island bone bed.
Yes. The 1910 discovery by Barnum Brown was truly remarkable. Game-changing, really.
Barnum Brown, famous name.
Absolutely. At a quarry along the Red Deer River, Brown's team found just this massive accumulation of Albertosaurus bones, just tons of them.
Wow.
And because there were so many bones and they had limited time, they focused on collecting sort of representative examples. They identified at least 9 individual dinosaurs based on the different skeletal elements they found.
9 initially. But that wasn't the end of the story for that bone bed, was it? It got rediscovered much later.
Precisely. Fast forward to 1997. Paleontologist Philip J. Currie relocated the site. It's now within Dry Island Buffalo Jump Provincial Park and started new excavations.
Curry. Okay.
Yeah. And these later digs, which went on until about 2008, unearthed even more Albertosaurus remains. They brought the minimum number of individuals identified up to at least 12 based on unique bones.
12 minimum.
Minimum. But if you consider mirrored bones of different sizes, left leg bone, right leg bone, different sizes representing different growth stages, the number could even be as high as 26 individuals.
26? From one spot?
From one spot. In total, over 1,000 Albertosaurus bones were recovered. It's the densest collection of large meat-eating dinosaur fossils from the Cretaceous period known anywhere in the world.
That's incredible.
This single site gave us this unprecedented look into not just what these creatures looked like, but how they grew and even potentially how they lived together. A true goldmine of information.
That sheer number is just staggering, and it must have provided insights into way more than just their anatomy, I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely. The Dry Island bone bed has provided incredible opportunities to study ontogeny. That's the fancy word for the growth and development of individuals in population biology.
Okay.
Finding individuals ranging from a tiny 2-year-old all the way up to a very old, large specimen allows for this really detailed analysis of their life history, how they lived, how they grew.
Were there other important Albertosaurus finds outside of this, incredible bone bed?
Yes, definitely. Several partial skulls and skeletons have popped up in Alberta since those initial discoveries. Now, none of these have given us a completely perfect skull, but they've added valuable pieces to our understanding of Albertosaurus anatomy. Little bits here and there.
Every bit helps, I guess.
Exactly. However, reports of Albertosaurus fossils from American states like Montana and Wyoming, well, they're generally considered doubtful. Probably not Albertosaurus.
So maybe not as widespread.
Yeah, they might not even belong to this specific genus. So, geographically, it seems Albertosaurus proper was pretty much an Alberta exclusive based on what we know for sure.
Okay. Given this unique location of the major finds, it does raise questions about its distribution. Now, let's talk about where Albertosaurus fits into the bigger dinosaur family tree. We know it's a Tyrannosaurid, but it had closer relatives, right?
Correct. Albertosaurus belongs to the family Tyrannosauridae, no surprise there. More specifically, though, it's in the subfamily Albertosaurinae.
Albertosaurinae, okay.
And its closest described relative is Gorgosaurus libratus. That's a slightly older tyrannosaurid found in the Dinosaur Park Formation, also in Alberta, and over in Montana, too.
Right, Gorgosaurus. And there's been some debate about whether Gorgosaurus is its own distinct thing or just another species of Albertosaurus.
That's a key point, absolutely. Back in 1970, Dale Russell suggested that Gorgosaurus was simply a junior synonym of Albertosaurus.
Junior synonym meaning?
Basically, it means that the name Gorgosaurus, while used for a while, was later deemed to refer to the same dinosaur as Albertosaurus. So the older name, Albertosaurus, takes precedence. He proposed renaming Gorgosaurus libratus as Albertosaurus libratus.
Why did he think that?
Well, this proposal was largely due to a lack of really good Albertosaurus skull material for comparison back then. They didn't have as much to go on.
Gotcha.
However, fast forward again to 2003, Philip J. Currie, benefiting from, way more extensive fossil finds, including that Dry Island stuff, and a deeper understanding of meat-eating dinosaur anatomy, he made a strong case for keeping them as separate genera.
Okay, so Currie argued they are different.
Yeah. He argued that the differences between Albertosaurus and Gorgosaurus were comparable to the differences we see between, say, Daspletosaurus and Tyrannosaurus.
Which everyone agrees are different.
Exactly, which are almost always considered distinct. So most researchers now agree with Currie. Separate genera.
Okay, that makes sense. So within the Tyrannosaurid family, Albertosaurinae is one branch. What's the other main branch then?
The other major subfamily is Tyrannosaurinae, and that includes the real heavyweights, like Tyrannosaurus, Tarbosaurus, and Daspletosaurus.
The big bruisers.
Pretty much. And one of the main differences between these two subfamilies is their overall build. Albertosaurians, including Albertosaurus and Gorgosaurus, tended to be more slender.
Slender.
Yeah, proportionally smaller skulls and longer lower leg and foot bones compared to the much more robust, heavily built tyrannosaurians.
Interesting. So even though Albertosaurus was smaller than some relatives, its story isn't less compelling.
Not at all. In fact, the sheer number of Albertosaurus fossils gives us a much, much clearer picture of its life compared to the rarer finds of some of those larger tyrannosaurs. We know way more about it in some ways.
It's fascinating to see these variations within what seems like, a similar group of giant predators. Now, there have been other species names linked to Albertosaurus over the years, right? But they're now considered invalid. A bit of taxonomic housekeeping.
Oh, absolutely. That happens a lot in paleontology as we learn more. Over time, various species were mistakenly assigned to the genus Albertosaurus.
Like what?
For example, Albertosaurus arctunguis. That's now considered the same as A. sarcophagus, just another specimen of the main species.
Okay.
Other names, like A. periculosus, that was based on a single tooth found way over in China, likely belonged to Tarbosaurus.
Right. Different continent, even.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Similarly, several other historical species assignments. Well, they've been shown to either belong to different genera entirely, or maybe represent juvenile forms of other known tyrannosaurs, or even potentially be juvenile Tyrannosaurus rex in some cases. Wow. It really highlights how our understanding evolves, doesn't it? It gets refined as we discover and analyze more fossils. That's the self-correcting nature of science in action.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So after all that taxonomic sorting, we have a much clearer picture of Albertosaurus sarcophagus. Okay, now let's get into the juicy details. What did this Alberta lizard actually look like?
Right, so Albertosaurus was a pretty sizable predator. Bipedal, walked on two legs, reaching lengths of about 8 to 9 meters.
So roughly 26 to 30 feet. Still pretty big.
Oh yeah, definitely impressive. And weighing an estimated 1.7 to maybe 3.0 metric tons.
A couple of cars worth.
Something like that. But it's important to remember it was smaller than its famous cousin, Tyrannosaurus rex.
Right. Not quite the T-Rex scale.
No. And like other tyrannosaurids, it had those characteristically short arms with only 2 functional fingers.
2 fingers. It always seems like such a strange feature on such a big animal.
It really does, doesn't
Yeah.
it? And a large, heavy head balanced by a long, muscular tail. Standard tyrannosaur build,
Yeah.
just a bit more gracile.
Okay. What about its senses? What was it equipped with to be such an effective predator?
Well, the skull suggests Albertosaurus had a strong sense of smell, like other tyrannosaurs, and powerful binocular vision eyes facing forward, giving it good depth perception.
Crucial for hunting.
Absolutely. And while we don't have like an exact measurement for its bite force as a tyrannosaur, it certainly had a bone-crushing bite. Maybe not quite as powerful as T-Rex's, but still formidable.
Definitely wouldn't want to be bitten. And the skull itself, it must have been a pretty impressive structure.
Indeed. The skull of a large adult could be around a meter or, about 3.3 feet long.
Yeah.
Quite big.
Wow.
It had these large openings in the skull called fenestrae. These helped reduce the weight, which is important when your head is that big.
Right. Less strain on the neck.
Exactly. And they also provided strong attachment points for powerful jaw muscles and housed its sensory organs. Its long jaws were lined with 58 or more teeth.
58 teeth. Were they all the same?
Good question.
Oh.
Mostly banana-shaped, pretty typical for tyrannosaurs. But interestingly, like other tyrannosaurids, Albertosaurus had different types of teeth depending on where they were in the mouth. That's called heterodonty.
Hetero what?
Heterodonty. Different teeth. The ones at the very front of the upper jaw, the premaxillary teeth, they were smaller, packed more closely together, and kind of D-shaped in cross-section. Different from the bigger, more typical teeth in the rest of the jaw.
Any idea why?
Probably different functions. Maybe those front teeth were better for gripping or pulling flesh, while the side teeth were more for shearing and crushing.
Fascinating. I've seen artistic reconstructions of Albertosaurus with bony crests above its eyes. What were those likely for?
Yeah, those short bony crests above the eyes are a noticeable feature, distinctive. It's thought that they might have been brightly colored in the living animal, maybe covered in keratin, like a bird's beak,
Oh, wow.
and potentially played a role in courtship displays, especially among males trying to attract a mate or maybe intimidate rivals. Visual signals.
Cool. We're really getting a picture of this animal. What about its skin? Was it scaly, or did it have feathers like some other dinosaurs?
That's a hot topic for dinosaurs in general. For Albertosaurus, we actually have 2 known skin impressions. Pretty rare finds.
Really? What do they show?
Both show scales. One patch, they think it's likely from the belly area, shows small, bumpy scales. Kind of pebbly. And they gradually get larger and somewhat hexagonal in shape in places.
Okay. Scales.
What's really interesting about that patch, though, is it also preserves 2 larger feature scales. They're spaced a few centimeters apart.
Feature scales, like special ones.
Yeah, bigger, maybe more prominent scales.
Mhm.
These are quite rare to find preserved in meat-eating dinosaurs. So Albertosaurus, along with Carnotaurus from South America, is one of the few known theropods to have them preserved.
That's a neat detail. And the other skin patch.
The other one, from an unknown part of the body, shows small, diamond-shaped scales arranged in rows. So based on the direct evidence we have so far, it points to scaly skin, at least on these parts of the body. No feathers found yet for Albertosaurus.
Okay, so scales, not feathers, on the areas we have impressions from. Good
Yeah.
to know. And what about its legs and feet? It was a bipedal runner, I assume, built for moving.
Yes, definitely built for moving on two legs. It had long legs ending in a four-toed foot.
Before toes.
Yeah. But the first toe, the hallux, was quite short and didn't actually reach the ground, like the dew claw on a dog, sort of. So it walked on the other three main toes.
Ah.
Its leg structure suggests it could likely achieve pretty decent walking speeds, maybe around 14 to 21 kilometers per hour, something like 9 to 13 miles per hour,
A brisk walk or slow jog.
something like that.
Uh,
And younger, lighter individuals might have been capable of even faster running speeds, more agile.
So, a formidable and likely pretty agile predator, especially the younger ones. Now, you mentioned the dry island bone bed gave us clues about its life history. What have we learned about how Albertosaurus grew and maybe how long it lived?
Right. This is where bone histology comes in. It's a fascinating technique.
Histology, like studying tissues.
Exactly. By looking at the microscopic structure of its bones, slicing them thin and examining them, we can actually estimate the age of an individual when it died.
How does that work?
Think of it like reading the rings of a tree. Bones often lay down growth lines, sort of like rings, reflecting periods of faster and slower growth. We can count these lines, basically.
Wow, okay.
And the dry island bone bed is perfect for this because it contains individuals of all sorts of ages, from a young 2-year-old all the way up to a 28-year-old.
28. That's pretty old for a dinosaur, isn't it?
For a large theropod, yeah, that's getting up there. And that 28-year-old is the oldest and largest known specimen, around 10 meters long.
So, what did plotting out the size and age show?
It reveals a classic S-shaped growth curve. There was a really rapid growth spurt over about a 4-year period, which seemed to end around age 16.
A teenage growth spurt, dinosaur style.
Pretty much. During this rapid phase, an Albertosaurus might have packed on approximately 122 kilograms. That's about 269 pounds per year. Yeah, assuming an adult weight of around 1.3 tons, which is one estimate, that's a significant amount of growth each year.
That's huge. And what about when they reached maturity? When could they start reproducing?
Well, the thinking is that the end of this rapid growth phase, around age 16 or so, likely coincided with the onset of sexual maturity.
Ah, okay.
But interestingly, they didn't just stop growing then. They continued to grow, just at a much slower rate throughout the rest of their lives.
So they hit maturity but kept getting bigger, just slower.
Exactly. This pattern, reaching sexual maturity while still growing, is actually seen in other dinosaurs and even some large modern mammals like crocodiles and some elephants.
Ah, how's that different from, say, birds?
It's quite different from birds, which are their closest living relatives. Birds typically wait until they've pretty much finished growing before they become sexually mature. So, different strategies.
Interesting. And the bone bed also gave us some hints about, like, survival rates, how likely they were to make it through different life stages.
Yes, that's another fascinating aspect, the relative scarcity of really young juvenile fossils. I mean, even though young Albertosaurus would have been quite large for their age pretty quickly,
Right.
their fossils aren't super common compared to adults.
Yeah.
This suggests that they might have had a lower mortality rate once they got past the really tiny hatchling stage.
So hatchlings were vulnerable, but if you made it past that.
Exactly. Hatchling bones are small and fragile, so less likely to preserve anyway. But it seems like once they got a bit bigger, their survival chances improved. Then, mortality rates seem to have increased again around age 12,
Why then?
possibly due to the physiological demands of that rapid growth spurt we talked about, just stresses on the body.
Makes sense.
And then mortality rates apparently doubled again around the time they reached sexual maturity, maybe age 16 or 17.
Doubled again? Why
Let's
would
see.
that be?
Well, this higher mortality continued into adulthood.
Yeah.
It could be due to the stresses of reproduction, increased competition for mates or resources, fighting, injuries, and eventually just the effects of old age for the few that made it that far.
So it sounds like a tough life.
It does. This pattern, high death rates for the very young, lower rates for juveniles, and then increasing rates for adults, with very few reaching maximum age, It's actually quite similar to what we observe in many large modern mammals, like buffalo or elephant.
Huh.
It's like building a demographic profile, a survivorship curve, for an extinct species based on that one amazing fossil site.
Absolutely fascinating. Really brings them to life.
Now, okay, the big question surrounding the dry island bone bed.
Hmm.
Does it tell us anything about how Albertosaurus behaved socially? Were they pack
Ah,
hunters?
yes, the pack hunting hypothesis. That's definitely a topic of ongoing discussion and debate.
What's the argument for it?
Well, the fact that you have so many Albertosaurus individuals, minimum 12, maybe up to 26, of different ages found together in one place, that's unusual for large predators.
Plus, there were relatively few remains of plant-eating dinosaurs mixed in. And crucially, all the Albertosaurus fossils seem to be in a similar state of preservation, suggesting they died around the same time, maybe in a single event.
Okay.
This led Philip Currie to propose that they died together because they lived together, possibly suggesting they hunted in cooperative packs.
And how might that have worked?
His idea was that maybe the younger, faster, more agile individuals could have herded prey, driven them towards the larger, more powerful adults who could make the kill. A coordinated strategy.
Like wolves or lions today?
Kind of analogous, yeah. That's a hypothesis.
But not everyone is convinced by the pack hunting idea, right?
Okay.
What are some of the other possible explanations for finding so many together?
Right. There are definitely skeptics and alternative interpretations. Some suggest the concentration of Albertosaurus could be the result of other factors, not social behavior.
Such a...
Well, perhaps a severe drought forced them all to congregate around a shrinking water source, and they died there. Or maybe a catastrophic flood drowned a group that happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
A natural disaster, not a pack.
Exactly. Or they might have become trapped in mud or quicksand, a natural trap. A predator trap is another possibility, where animals are drawn in by struggling prey, but the relative lack of herbivore remains at the dry island site makes that one maybe less likely. So I've even suggested a scenario more like modern Komodo dragons, where multiple predators might gather opportunistically at a large carcass.
Okay, scavenging together, maybe.
Or competing fiercely over it. This could lead to intense competition, maybe even fights where some individuals get killed and, well, possibly cannibalized.
Cannibalism in Albertosaurus.
Interestingly, yes. More recent evidence, like bite marks on bones that match Albertosaurus teeth, has indeed suggested possible cannibalism in the genus. So, a feeding frenzy gone wrong is another alternative to explain the bone bed.
So the pack hunting theory is fascinating, but definitely controversial. What are the biggest hurdles in, definitively proving that kind of complex social behavior in long extinct animals?
Well, it's just really difficult to rule out those other explanations completely based only on the fossil evidence. Behavior doesn't fossilize directly.
Right.
We have to infer it from the context, the bones, the geology. And aggregations of fossils can happen for many reasons.
So the jury's still out to some extent on the coordinated pack hunting?
I'd say so. While we do see evidence of multiple individuals found together at sites for other large meat-eating dinosaurs like Allosaurus, Maposaurus, even its relative Daspletosaurus, these large aggregations of predatory dinosaurs are generally much rarer finds compared to the massive bone beds we see for many plant-eating species, which were almost certainly herd animals.
Right, hadrosaurs and ceratopsians?
Exactly. Those other predator finds might offer some support for the idea of social behavior in tyrannosaurs, but it remains challenging to definitively prove coordinated hunting packs versus just, temporary gatherings or mass death events. Even Currie himself, who initially proposed the pack idea, later acknowledged back in 2010 that something like a slow rise in water levels during a prolonged flood could potentially also explain the dry island bone bed.
So even the main proponent acknowledges alternatives.
Yeah. It really highlights just how challenging it can be to interpret behavior purely from fossil remains. A fascinating puzzle.
It really does. Okay, let's shift gears slightly and talk about what we can learn from injuries and diseases found in Albertosaurus fossils, this field called paleopathology.
Right, paleopathology studying ancient diseases and injuries. We have found evidence of a few different kinds of ailments in Albertosaurus specimens.
Like what?
Well, one interesting idea revolves around these smooth-edged holes found in the jaws of some tyrannosaurids, including Albertosaurus.
Holes in the jaw.
Yeah. It's been proposed that these might have been caused by a parasitic infection, something similar to avian trichomoniasis, a disease that affects birds today.
A parasite. How would that work?
In birds, it's often spread through contaminated food or water, or even during fights. It causes lesions in the mouth and throat. If Tyrannosaurs had something similar, it could have been spread perhaps through biting, maybe during face biting, which we think they did, or cannibalism, and it might have made it really difficult for them to eat if it got bad enough.
Yikes. That's a pretty gruesome thought.
Isn't it? Gives you a very different picture.
Were there many signs of injuries, like broken bones, in the Albertosaurus fossils? More physical trauma?
Interestingly, one study specifically looked for stress fractures in foot bones, tiny cracks from repeated stress.
Hmm.
They actually found them to be relatively uncommon in Albertosaurus compared to another big meat-eater, Allosaurus, which seemed to have more of them, maybe suggesting slightly different lifestyles or hunting techniques.
Huh. What else?
Well, one specimen, the original one named Albertosaurus arctungus, which we now think is just a sarcophagus, had a significant hole, like a lesion, in his hip bone, the ilium, though it wasn't initially recognized as an injury or disease.
Okay.
We've also seen some examples of bony outgrowths, exostoses, on bones, and a more recent study that specifically looked at the health of the Albertosaurus fossils from the dry island bone bed. Well, it found that most individuals actually showed no signs of disease or major injury.
So mostly healthy.
Mostly, yeah. A few had some bony spurs on their toes, maybe due to tendon issues. Some ribs showed evidence of healed breaks, which you might expect in active animals.
Right, accidents happen.
And one adult even had a lower jaw with a puncture wound and both healed and unhealed bite marks, likely from a fight with another Albertosaurus.
Whoa, evidence of fighting.
Yeah. But overall, the relatively low number of abnormalities suggests that the Albertosaurus population represented at the Tri-Island site was actually quite healthy, especially compared to some other dinosaur populations that have been studied elsewhere.
That's fascinating. These glimpses into the individual lives and potential struggles of these ancient animals. It's amazing what bones can tell us.
It really is.
Okay, finally, let's talk about the world Albertosaurus inhabited, its paleoecology. What was its environment like, and what other creatures did it share its home with?
Right, the bigger picture. Albertosaurus lived during the early to middle Maastrichtian age of the late Cretaceous period. We're talking around 71 million years ago.
71 million years. Hard to wrap your head around.
Isn't it? And as we mentioned, its known range was mainly limited to what is now Alberta, Canada, though there's that possible but unconfirmed species reported from Mexico.
Okay, and the environment in Alberta back then?
They lived in the deltas and floodplains of large rivers. This was during the latter part of the time when the Horseshoe Canyon Formation sediments were being deposited.
Horseshoe Canyon Formation.
Yeah. This was a time when a large inland sea, the Western Interior Seaway, was receding from the area. That led to a variety of different environments being created along the coast and further inland river systems, swamps, floodplains.
You mentioned a sort of forested environment earlier. What kind of plants would have been around for the herbivores Albertosaurus preyed upon?
Well, our sources don't list every single plant, but generally, the late Cretaceous saw the flourishing of flowering plants, angiosperms. But alongside them, you still had more ancient groups dominating in many areas, things like ferns, cycads, conifers. So it would have been a landscape with pretty diverse plant life, especially along those river systems where things were wetter.
Okay, so a landscape of rivers and floodplains, diverse plants. What about the other animals? Who were its neighbors, both potential prey and maybe potential competitors?
The Horseshoe Canyon Formation is just a treasure trove of vertebrate fossils.
Yeah.
Really rich. In the water, you had sharks, rays, various kinds of bony fish. Mammals were also present, but generally small back then. Early groups like multituberculates and marsupials scurrying around.
Pitbull guys.
Mostly. Freshwater environments were home to turtles, the reptile Champsosaurus, and various crocodilians like Ladysuchus and Stanchiochampsa.
But the dinosaurs were the main event, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. Dinosaurs were the dominant land animals. Plant-eating dinosaurs, especially hadrosaurs. The duck-billed dinosaurs were incredibly abundant.
Like who?
General like Edmontosaurus, Saurolophus, and Hypacrosaurus. These guys were everywhere and were very likely a primary food source for Albertosaurus.
Main course.
Probably. Horned dinosaurs, ceratopsians, were also common, and the agile ostrich mimics, the ornithomimids.
Okay.
Less frequently found, but still part of the ecosystem, were the armored ankylosaurians and the thick-headed pachycephalosaurs.
A diverse menu, then. What about other predators?
The ecosystem also included other meat-eating dinosaurs, but they were generally smaller than an adult Albertosaurus. Things like troodontids, known for their relatively large brains, dromaeosaurids, the raptor dinosaurs, relatives of Velociraptor, and canagnathids, which were more bird-like, possibly omnivorous theropods.
So Albertosaurus was king.
An adult Albertosaurus would have definitely been the apex predator in this specific environment, the top of the food chain.
Besides Albertosaurus, what other kinds of predators shared this landscape? Would there have been any competition, especially maybe for younger Albertosaurus?
That's a great point. While the adults were likely unchallenged, juvenile Albertosaurus may well have filled intermediate predator roles. They might have competed with and possibly even preyed upon some of these smaller meat-eaters like the dromaeosaurs or troodontids.
So different niches at different ages.
Very likely. Oh, and interestingly, that small, possibly insectivorous, bird-like theropod Albertonicus has also been found right there at the Dry Island bone bed, living alongside Albertosaurus.
Huh. So it was a really bustling, complex ecosystem, with Albertosaurus clearly playing a major role, especially at the top.
Like a dynamic, late Cretaceous world.
Wow. This deep dive into Albertosaurus has been truly eye-opening, just incredible the amount of detail. What are some of the key takeaways that really stand out for you from all this?
For me, I think it's just the incredible amount of detail we've managed to piece together about this one genus.
Yep.
And it's almost all thanks to the sheer number of fossil discoveries, especially that amazing Dry Island bone bed.
Right.
We've gone from, a few initial fragments named over a century ago to having a relatively comprehensive understanding of its anatomy, how it grew, its potential diseases, possible social behaviors, and the whole environment it lived in. It just really shows the power of having a rich fossil record for a particular species.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I think one of the real aha moments is seriously considering the possibility of pack hunting, or at least some kind of group living, in such a large meat-eating dinosaur. Or even just the detailed insights we have into their growth rates and potential diseases. It really challenges that classic image we often have of these giant predators as just solitary, unchanging monsters.
It does.
It's just mind-blowing to think about these creatures living and interacting in potentially complex ways millions and millions of years ago.
Absolutely. And understanding these ancient ecosystems and the life histories of extinct animals like Albertosaurus, it gives us such a crucial perspective, doesn't it, on the sheer vastness of geological time and the evolutionary processes that have shaped all life on Earth, including us eventually.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even creatures that seem like something out of a fantasy movie were once real, complex living beings, navigating intricate environments, facing challenges, living, growing, dying.
So as you, our listener, think about the world of Albertosaurus, maybe consider this. With the evidence we have for potential social behavior and those different life stages preserved so vividly in the fossil record, what might a typical day actually have looked like for a young Albertosaurus, maybe in one of those potential packs?
Yeah.
How would it have navigated a landscape filled with both potential meals, those big hadrosaurs, but also other predators, maybe even bigger, older Albertosaurus? What unanswered questions still linger about their social dynamics, their hunting strategies in that specific late Cretaceous world?
Lots to think about still.
Definitely some food for thought as you go about your day.
Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.